Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show. Here I am. Happy St. Valentine, everybody. Of course, to my other half, Christy, who is always around us. Even Thank you, Christy. And thanks to our sponsors, we are here. Helen Sucatre. Grazie, Helen. Thanks to Margot Rosata Minta, and also thanks to Daniel Estes. I want to thank all of my sponsors, also those who have purchased this and also the other books, like the 12 volumes of my Illuminati Confessions, which are a real encyclopedia. And as you know, this new format is dedicated to 20 years of Illuminati Confessions that didn't go under the radar. They were even detected by Jeffrey Epstein. In fact, my name appears in the Epstein files as the creator of the Illuminati Confessions and of my blog back then. And here I am with the book, guys, which is the only book that talks the truth regarding Epstein, that mentions the Sabbatean Frankists and their involvement. Otherwise, there is no other books like this one. Now, suddenly, we have Jay Dyer saying, Jeffrey Epstein is the real Illuminati. Ooh, what a discovery, Jay Dyer. Well, we know, guys, that the Leo Zagami Show is always in front of everybody regarding certain topics. And today we are discussing B'nai Brit. Yeah, it's important, guys. It's a very important episode because I want to discuss the involvement, of course, of B'nai Brits, Roy Cohn, and Donald Trump in the rise of Epstein, but also of B'nai Brit in general, because it is a form of Jewish Freemasonry, which, like I explained in this book, was created by the Sabbatean Frankists, and it got to the point of creating also their own Illuminati in the early 90s with the mega group, which was headed by Les Wexner. But today we're going to go dig deep into the history of the whole thing. But first of all, an applause, Zagami style, to our sponsors and to all the people who are supporting us. Thank you. And if you want to participate as a donor, you can do it anonymously. You can do it, of course, publicly through GoFundMe or Cash App. You can find the Cash App handle at riozagami.com together with my latest articles. Okay, here we go. I know it's going to be a long and interesting episode, guys, because, I mean, here we are talking about the real people behind the whole thing. I'm going to show you documents, receipts, as they call them, on the people who apparently facilitated the rise of Trump, but also the rise of Jeffrey Epstein. And one of the most controversial guys was, of course, Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn, yes. Here we have Roy Cohn next to a younger Donald J. Trump, as Roy Cohn, this controversial lawyer from the McCarthy era, is actually often indicated as Trump's mentor. But very few people know his involvement, his family involvement, because it started with his father in the B'nai B'rith. And very few people in America really know a lot about B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith was created in the 1840s here in America by Ashkenazi Jews who were a little bit fed up of the fact that the Sephardic Jews had created already a much stronger alliance with Freemasonry from the very start. In fact, amongst the 11 Freemasons who created the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in Charleston, 4 of them were Sephardi Jews, and 2 of them were Sabbatean Frankists. The other 2 potentially were also Sabbatean Frankists. This is very interesting. Very few people know the whole story of B'nai B'rith, but very few people know the story of American Freemasonry is really connected with the Jewish people. Now, this book, as you know, is not anti-Semitic. It's actually a book which wants to separate facts from fiction, and it's actually been also appreciated even by Orthodox Jews. A growing number of Orthodox Jews are contacting me saying, you have done a great job, because it's about the truth, guys. There is no reason for speculating. Israel is a Sabbatean Frankist state. Zionism was created by the Sabbatean Frankists, and both the labor Zionists as well as the more conservative revisionist Zionists are the product of the Sabbatean Frankists. So who are the victims? The victims are the Jewish people and the Israeli, but the problem is that the Sabbatean Frankists have been around for a very long time. They have created some very important institutions. And like I explained in my book, behind Jeffrey Epstein, there was, of course, the banking cartel of the Sabbatean Frankists. Members of B'nai B'rith have included Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, but also bankers like Jacob Schiff. In my book, I explain how Jacob Schiff and the Warburgs sustained the initial revolution, the Bolsheviks, who basically took over Russia, and they did it at a very early stage. But back in 1905, it was actually Jacob Schiff himself, who was a very high-level representative of B'nai B'rith, who said, if the Tsar doesn't want to give to our people, the Jews, the freedom we deserve, we will manifest a revolution that will take over Russia. And then that is what happened. So Jacob Schiff is also a very important figure of the Sabbatean Frankist movement, but also, as you know, it becomes also a very important figure of the Federal Reserve System, and we have done a whole episode that explains that. But Jacob Schiff was the one who then would support another Sabbatean Frankist, who was Leon Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary. But let me explain a little bit what is B'nai Brit and why the real interpretation of the name B'nai Brit is also very important to understand what we will be discussing today. Because today, guys, I will be showing you documents that prove that Donald J. Trump has been involved in all this from the very start. Here in these documents that I have retrieved from the Ronald Reagan Library, we have some very interesting things. Okay, Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, Digital Library Collections. Let's go into this digital library. And here we have immediately a letter from April 29, 1983, from Ronald Reagan to Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn has always been a very controversial figure. We will be discussing him very much today. And is often, like we said, described as being the mentor of Donald J. Trump. In this letter, it says, "Dear Roy, I am delighted to send my greetings and congratulations as you are honored because, as I explained in my book, he was a member of a very important lodge of the B'nai Brit, not any kind of lodge, but a lodge with a great influence, a lodge known as B'nai Brit's Banking and Finance Lodge, which still exists. And there was this event called, you see, B'nai Brit, Banking and Finance Lodge, and the Banking and Finance Division of State of Israel Bonds request the pleasure of your company at the testimonial dinner in honor of Roy Cohn. Guest speaker, also this guy is important, remember him, Alphonse M. D'Amato. But when we go here into the tribute to Roy Cohn, before going into the tribute to Roy Cohn and explaining who Roy Cohn really was, Children of the Covenant is their official name. But in reality, the real name, interpreted in the correct way, was for Rabbi Antelman, Sabbatai is my illumination. And I will explain to you how that needs to be interpreted the correct way. First of all, there was a number of people that arrived from Europe. They were, most of them Sabbatean Frankist, most of them Ashkenazi. They arrived here in America, and there was a massive immigration in the 19th century from Center and Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, of Jews of Ashkenazi descent. The Sephardic Jews had been already here for quite a while. It is said actually the Sephardic Jews were even with, even Cristoforo Colombo, I call him in Italian Cristoforo Colombo, but I call him Cristoforo Colombo, was deemed to be a Sephardic Jew together with other of his team, of his maritime team on his free ships that eventually arrived here in the United States of America. So what happened with the Sephardic Jews and why eventually the Ashkenazi decided to create the B'nai Brit? So let me explain how the B'nai Brit was created in 1843. Let me explain also the real significance of this name, which initially they were known as the Bundesbrüder, which means League of Brothers. But this kind of seemed too obvious, no? And so in the end, it was changed to B'nai Brit, and was founded in Aaron Shimmer's cafe in New York City, Lower East Side, on October 13, 1843, by 12 Jewish gentlemen that, of course, symbolize these 12 Jewish tribes. Rabbi Antelman describes the group as Jewish-born German Sabbatean Bundists who immigrated to the United States in the 19th century. This is what I wrote also here in my book. The influence of the Sabbatean Frankists is obvious. But let me also explain what I also cited here from Rabbi Anterman regarding the real meaning, the hidden interpretation of B'nai Brit, which means officially sons of the covenant. But the meaning is a different one. The Sabbateans utilized Atbash in amulets and certain esoteric secrets. Sabbatai's name itself was cryptically written as Babetai. The first letter of his name, Shin, was substituted with Bet. When the Hebrew letters that put together the organization's spelling, known as B'nai Brit, that was also changed slightly from the initial spelling, are rearranged, one obtains Babetai Neri, which decodes into, translated, Shabbatai is my illumination. In other words, as I write in my book on Jeffrey Epstein, the hidden meaning of B'nai Brit is Sabbatean enlightenment. The term B'nai Brit, however, does occur in the Mishnah or in Judaic literature. But what I gave you today is the real symbolism. Now, often we have this legend, occasionally mentioned to this day, that B'nai Brit founders were Jews who were barred from membership in the Masonic orders and the Odd Fellows. That is pure BS, because there was amongst the 12 members several members of Freemasonry and of the Odd Fellows. And both Freemasonry as well as the Odd Fellows, which is another known fraternal organization, were filled with the Jewish members here in America. But like I said earlier, the Sephardic Jews had also been at the center of the development of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Supreme Council, as well as the foundation of the Odd Fellows themselves. So it's very important to explain all these things. So then you will have at the end, because at the moment, everybody is submerged by all this unsettling truth about the Epstein files that reveal power and privilege. But what I'm going to show you today, guys, is that this power and privilege has always been here, and has been certified by the presidents of the United States themselves. Check out here all the presidents who had something to say about B'nai Brit International, building, as they say here, a better world. We have basically here it says, since our founding in 1843, B'nai Brit has been a leader in the fields of community service and philanthropy. And one would say that's okay. Our vital work around the globe, spanning 3 centuries, has been recognized by US presidents and other leaders, from Grover Cleveland to Donald Trump. I think you spell it Grover, yeah. American presidents have acknowledged that B'nai Brit's commitment to prompting programs of tolerance and all this. After I will explain you why B'nai Brit in reality has been built to transform Judaism in Reform Judaism and what is today, and basically fighting Mosaic laws one by one, eliminating them and substituting them with a new form of Judaism, which is in itself completely satanic. Here you have Grover Cleveland, president, who says, a society formed for the furtherance of such noble purposes as that of B'nai Brit should not only excite enthusiasm of its members, but should also inspire the good wishes of all who desire to see humanity better and the higher instincts of our nature cultivated. But, of course, here we have Theodore Roosevelt, who says, hearty good wishes to B'nai Brit, all success. So here we have all the presidents of the United States, William Howard Taft, who also says, I have great respect for B'nai Brit because of the good of which it has done. Yes, sure. But why didn't they help then the Jews when they really needed at the time of the biggest need after the election of Adolf Hitler? They could have really done something there. They did nothing. Here we have Woodrow Wilson, who says, the fine work of B'nai B'rith undoubtedly contributes to the uplift and betterment of the nation. I have been particularly interested in the work of education and philanthropy. Because philanthropy, even Jeffrey Epstein called himself a philanthropist. Remember, guys. Here we have Warren Harding. Then we have Calvin Coolidge. We have Herbert C. Hoover. We have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who says, B'nai B'rith, and I'm quoting Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has effectively served the well-being of American Jewry and the nation. Ooh, wow. And then we have, of course, Harry Truman, who says, B'nai B'rith service during peace, as we counted upon it with such good results during war. The fine patriotic service of B'nai B'rith during the war years has earned a nation's gratitude. Okay. So here, guys, and then you have Dwight Eisenhower, you have John F. Kennedy, who says voluntary organizations such as B'nai B'rith are an essential part of a free society. This was the guy who criticized secret societies, but maybe not societies with secrets, because everybody knows B'nai B'rith, but in reality, nobody knows the secrets of B'nai B'rith. Then you have Lyndon Johnson. Then you have another guy who had some problems, yes. He got kicked out with Watergate. Richard Nixon. The highest standards of B'nai B'rith and of the United States and of humanity are all one and the same today. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. We have Gerald Ford on B'nai B'rith. We have Jimmy Carter on B'nai B'rith. We have Ronald Reagan. B'nai B'rith has sponsored religious, cultural, and civil program. I mean, every single president in the United States, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama. Barack Obama says, quote, B'nai B'rith International has helped open our eyes to injustice. Ooh, wow. Why? Well, because they founded, of course, the Anti-Defamation League. Then we have Donald J. Trump. Over the past 175 years, B'nai B'rith International has enhanced the lives of Jewish people and of many others around the world through charity, volunteerism, educational programs, and advocacy efforts. These achievements extend far beyond their community or one country, and they reflect a sustained commitment to enriching the spirit of humanity. Okay, at this point, let's dig deep into the B'nai B'rith's history and the connection with America and how they have been created as an ulterior way for the Sabbatean Frankists to take over the show. The Sabbatean Frankists initially, like I said, tried to take over the show by inserting in the 11 Gentlemen of Charleston, who founded the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite in 1801, 4 of their, at least 2 were Sabbatean Frankists. For sure, the other 2 are in doubt, but they might have well been. They were all members of Charleston Sephardic community, the Kahal Kadosh Bet Elohim congregation, which at the time was one of the biggest communities in America. The 4 Jewish founders of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. You all know, of course, that the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite was founded in Charleston and then was moved to Washington, and it's the guiding body of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which is a rite of Freemasonry. Now, very few people, though, know the whole history of this rite, and it's important, I think, for me to explain you a little bit about the connection with the Jewish community, because it's a very intense connection. Okay, so who were the 4 Jewish founders? Here we're talking about the first wave of Sabbatean Frankists, which is the Sephardic wave. If you study my book, you understand that the Sephardic were involved with the Sabbateans even before they became Sabbatean Frankists, because it was only in the 18th century that then the Frankist heresy developed within the Ashkenazi with the Jacob Frank. Now, amongst the four Jewish founders of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, there was Israel de Liben. Israel de Liben was known as a liberal-headed Jew. So he was liberal. And this is already a sign of a Sabbatean Frankist. But the indication he was a Sabbatean Frankist for sure comes from the fact that he was born in Prague. As I explained, Prague is a Sabbatean Frankist hotspot, also for the Epstein family. They come from Prague, as well as Warsaw, and then they moved from Prague into Vienna. The Asiatic Brethren were the Freemasons. They were the first Masonic order that accepted the Jews in their lodges. And Israel de Liben had been accepted as a Freemason in Europe before moving to Charleston, where he belonged after to the Sephardic community of Charleston, which, I repeat, was the largest and most influential Jewish community in the United States at the time. Born in Prague, he served after as the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite first Grand Treasurer General. His name was Israel de Liben. I don't know if we find a photo maybe of him here. I can maybe show you. And it's quite interesting to see, no, not this, the face of a Sabbatean Frankist sympathizer. And now I'm going to also show you from the original document. Let me see if we can close this. Okay. And let me show you here Israel de Liben. Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show. Today we are discussing how B'nai Brit helped, of course, Donald Trump and Epstein, and what is B'nai Brit? Israel de Liben was born in Prague, Bohemia. He became a Mason during a stay in Dublin, Ireland, and later emigrated to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, Savannah, and ultimately Charleston. He was well active in the Beth Elohim congregation. Some people say that he only became a Freemason when he went to Ireland, others that he was already a Freemason when he got to Ireland. That, of course, is a matter of... But Israel de Liben was one of the founders of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. The other Jewish founder was Abraham Alexander. Abraham Alexander, born in 1743 and died in 1816, was born in London. He was a volunteer, known in Jewish as Azan, lay minister for the Beth Elohim congregation for 2 decades, and served as the Supreme Council Grand Secretary General. It's a very important congregation, the one he was a part of still to this day. Let me show you. Of course, now it reflects those typical progressive values, because a lot of what the B'nai Brit did was to actually transform Judaism from within. The other important member was Emmanuel de la Motta, a merchant and auctioneer born in Danish West Indies. He was a sovereign Grand Inspector General and later the first Grand Treasurer General of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. He's also credited, though, with establishing later on in August of 1813 the Northern Jurisdiction. So the Northern Jurisdiction was established by... But here we are talking, first of all, of the Scottish Rite before arriving to B'nai Brit, because the Scottish Rite and the Supreme Council that moved after from Charleston to Washington is the trade union that B'nai Brit uses to connect with Freemasonry. So here you have a full picture. First of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, which was founded in 1801, and then, of course, and here you can see yourself if you want, Emmanuel Motta. It says here his family is said to have fled to the New World to escape Spanish persecution. This is what happened. Often we said that was one of the things that pushed a lot of Jews to, of course, leave Spain. His name is prominently connected with Freemasonry, and in reality is connected to the establishment of the first Supreme Council, but also with the northern the jurisdiction of, so both with the southern jurisdiction as one of the founding members, as well as the northern jurisdiction. Then we have another guy called Moses Clava Levi. Moses Clava Levi, another member, founding member of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Supreme Council of Charleston, was added to the Supreme Council after the foundation in May 1801, in May 1802, so a year later. And Levi was, he served alongside, of course, the influential figures like Israel the Lieben and Isaac Old. Not all of them were Jewish. We said of the 11 members of the Supreme Council, of the first Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, the famous southern jurisdiction, which also calls itself the Mother Council of the World, 4 were Jewish and also connected to the Sabbatean Frankists. And Moses Clava Levi is rather known because he apparently is celebrated for his bravery during the Great Fires in Charleston in 1838. Instead of saving his own home, he went and prioritized saving the sacred Torah scrolls from the Kahal Kadosh Bet Elohim synagogue, which he was part of. Then, on top of the 4, we said that these were the 4 members, Israel de Lieben, Abraham Alexander, Emmanuel de la Motta, and Moses Clava Levi. On top of that, the Moses Michael Hayes is another very important figure. I'm going to show you this gentleman because this guy is another very influential American Freemason and Jew. He didn't become, because he actually, Moses Michael Hayes, died in 1805, and so he died before they, he died while they were still doing it. He was not, he helped establish, though, as you can see here, the early Masonic movement in New England, and he was elected Grand Master in 1792 with Paul Revere as his deputy. Paul Revere as his deputy, guys. And, of course, he was Sephardic. So this was to just simply explain to you why the Sephardic Jews had taken over. Then there was also the war there was a war between competing jurisdictions. Moses Michael Hayes was considered the foundational figure of the Scottish Rite, though he was not one of the 11 gentlemen of Charleston who formally established the first council in 1801. But he was considered like, a foundational figure. So Moses Michael Hayes was profoundly connected with the establishment and the foundation of the Scottish Rite in North America, because in 1768 he was appointed by the general for the Rite for the West Indies, the famous Henry Andrew Franken, a deputy of Stephen Morin, now enabling him to spread the order of the royal secret. I'm going to show you a second here this document. First of all, it's important also the name. Henry Andrew Franken. That Franken is, of course, a name of Ashkenazi Jewish origin. And he was actually involved with the creation of these degrees that after became the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite. This is the Franken manuscript, an original copy, very rare, which lays down all the various degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. You see? Here the degrees, Now, there was a problem, a conflict that also explains the power that the Sabbatean Frankists have over the right from the very beginning, because there was a guy who became, by the way, the founder of the Grand Lodge of Cuba, but then later on gave birth to the Chernaurite. Now, there was a conflict between Masonic jurisdictions. He had basically created a Supreme Council, which was regarded as spurious of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and for that reason, he would be fought by Emmanuel de la Motta, this merchant, this founding member of the Scottish Rite in Charleston, and for that reason, after Emmanuel de la Motta, who waged war against this Chernahu, who was a Christian, who accused the Rite, created the Supreme Council, the original Supreme Council in Charleston, of having, in a way, let's say, created the Rite on premises that were somehow damaging Christians and favoring Jews. Now, the 11 founding members of the first ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Supreme Council, 5 were Protestant, 4 were Jews, including Emmanuel de la Motte, and 2 were Roman Catholics, and they were both Jesuit agents, Leconte Alexandre François Agustin de Grasse and his father-in-law, Jean-Baptiste Marie de la Hogue. Now, Jewish individuals were also involved with the foundation and expansion of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, with the records indicating that some early members and leaders were present in specific regions in Canada, in Germany, and the organization that was founded by Thomas Weedle in Baltimore in 1819 was known for being non-sectarian. So at one point, what happened was that apparently somebody had proposed to open a lodge, Odd Fellow Lodge, to the guy who would then end up founding the B'nai B'rith. They proposed to him, why don't we open an Odd Fellow Lodge only for Jews? And he said, no, I will instead do a completely new, create a completely new order. And that order, initially, at least until the 1920s, was clearly Masonic. I mean, like I explained also in my book on Jeffrey Epstein, until the 1920s, they had Masonic, similar to Masonic regalia. So you had the aprons, medal things, all in a Masonic style, let's say. Now, there's very few, books that talk about B'nai B'rith. The subject of B'nai B'rith has always been kept very secretive. But like I explained, it wasn't because, like, it's common knowledge that the Jews couldn't join Freemasonry. They couldn't join Freemasonry in countries like Germany, if not the lodges of the Sabbatean Frankists, which were the Asiatic Brethren. But here in America, as you can see, both the Odd Fellows and the Freemasons were quite open to Jews. However, there was some problems when we start to see this massive Ashkenazi immigration in the 19th century, because the Sephardic Jews initially saw the Ashkenazi immigration of the 19th century as a threat to their own wealth. And in reality, when the Ashkenazi arrived, they were really super successful. All the big banking families are all Ashkenazi, and most of them are Sabbatean Frankists. So this is just to give you, let's say, the first 39 minutes of the show today. I've given you a introduction to this subject of the B'nai B'rith, which is a form of Jewish Freemasonry. And a former Jewish Freemason that initially the founders were all Ashkenazi Jews, but immediately after the foundation, their success eventually brought all Jews together, Sephardic and Ashkenazi, to collaborate together, because eventually became the most important and influential Jewish fraternity. The most influential Jewish fraternity. And if you want to know more about them, I will suggest, aside from my latest book on Jeffrey Epstein, if you read French, there is definitely this book, which is very interesting, Mystère et Secret du B'nai Brit, which is a French book by Emmanuel Ratier, one of the very few books on these subjects. And then there is, in the English language instead, a more historic but still interesting book by Edward E. Grusd called B'nai Brit, The Story of the Covenant. This is also an interesting book that you can read on this subject. Now, regarding the actual origins of the B'nai Brit, there is conflicting tales, and you can all find them on this story of the Covenant by Edward E. Grusd. Of course, each of the co-founders of the B'nai Brit wanted to be the biggest protagonist of it. So, that's why you have conflicting. And then also this thing about having created something because they were not accepted elsewhere, when in reality, we know for sure that there was both Freemasons and member of the Odd Fellows in the B'nai Brit. The B'nai Brit was very important for the family of Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn is the guy who really creates a very important situation that predates Jeffrey Epstein, because, guys, there has always been this sex trafficking and blackmailing through sex operations conducted by the United States intelligence, and they predate Jeffrey Epstein by decades. So how did they originate? Well, they originated a long time ago. And first of all, let's talk about how all this gets to Roy Cohn, and to Jeffrey Epstein. The fact Roy Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein were direct, we don't have evidence that they were direct acquaintances or that they ever met. Because Roy Cohn, when he dies in the second half of the 1980s, that is the moment in which Epstein meets with Trump shortly after, and also is the moment in which the elite behind Roy Cohn gives that blackmailing operation, using sex and all that, and everything that you see with Jeffrey Epstein is very much also including the arm deals, something, and of course everything connected to Israel, because we have to unravel today, of course, the intelligence ties of the Maxwell family, but at the same time the mega group, the Maxwells and the Mossad, the spy story, which is really at the heart of the Epstein scandal. And we have to start, though, with this government blackmailing operations and explaining a little bit about Trump's mentor. Because Trump, here I'm going to show you in this documents that I have here, you will see also the name of Trump in a very important dinner in honor of Roy Cohn for the B'nai Brit. Roy Cohn's father had been also a very important figure of the B'nai Brit, but he was a leader, like I explained in my book, of the Banking and Finance Lodge. And in 1983, in tribute to Roy M. Cohn, as it says here, B'nai Brit Banking and Finance Lodge takes special pride in according this well-deserved public tribute to Roy Cohn at its annual State of Israel Bond dinner. In public life, he has been a tenacious champion of Israel's right to exist in peace and security and of American political. The guy was a crook, a big crook. But the appreciation, of course, banking and finance lodge is pleased to take this occasion to grant special recognition to 11 previous guests of honor. Okay, let me show you here one name, which is a very important name. An honorary chairman can also not be Jewish. We have, of course, here Rupert Murdoch, who is Jewish, and we know who is Rupert Murdoch. But as you can see here, you have also Donald J. Trump. This is a very important dinner, because here in this dinner and in this event, we have some very important people that will be connected for many years ahead to Epstein, to Trump. Ronald Lauder. So this is all a lot of internal material that I've gathered to explain a little bit the situation today to those who don't know. So behind Les Wexner, behind Epstein's mysterious wealth, you have to go back to a guy called Samuel Bronfman, because these are the origins of these blackmailing operations, and it's very important to explain them. There's many questions today on Jeffrey Epstein, if he had worked for the intelligence and all that. But in reality, it was the intelligence, like I always said, that worked for the Sabbatean Frankist elite, for the B'nai Brit, that is Jewish Freemasonry. Epstein was running a blackmailing operation, of course, but he was working also for various intelligence agencies that were all connected and all operating under these love traps, no? How the Washington Post once nicknamed the CIA's love traps. These love traps were excogitated, but remember, it's not about a state here. It's about a sect, an all-powerful sect. Today, the B'nai Brit is a massive institution. It's a very influential institution. Samuel Bronfman, who was part of it, was involved in the Prohibition era. And he was involved, of course, as other Jews at the time, with the Italian mafia. So Samuel Bronfman was a prominent Canadian distiller who built a fortune by legally producing alcohol in Canada and smuggling it into the United States during the Prohibition between 1920 and 1933. So these kind of people, as you can imagine, they're not really nice people. They are crooks, the biggest crooks. And Samuel Bronfman, then, his two sons will end up in the elite of the B'nai Brit, in the mega group that was founded by Lex Wexner in 1991, which I talk about here with Steven Spielberg, with Lauder, and other elite members of the B'nai Brit. Now, so we start also with another important person who is linked to Bronfman and to the B'nai Brit. We're talking about Louis Rosenstiel. Now, this guy here is very important because he will be the mentor of Roy Cohn. So it's important to show you who this guy is and explain you who this guy is. I know it's a little bit complicated today. We have a bit, it's probably we should divide it in two parts of the show but this guy is another big crook. And of course, liquor distributor and philanthropist, fundraiser for Jewish causes. This guy is also one of the elite members of the B'nai Brit, but he was also behind operations similar to the ones we are seeing with, that are coming out with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein is nothing new. He's the product of a system that predates him. And the Bronfman family, I repeat, now with the sons of Samuel Bronfman, Edgar and Charles, who were co-founders of the mega group, were also very important in all this situation. But it's very important to understand here that all these people have always gone untouched by the law. Even Roy Cohn, when he had his own scandals, got always untouched by the law. The guy was, so high up. I showed you a letter written by Ronald Reagan. This is a photo of him and Ronald Reagan at the White House. Here. See, Roy Cohn here, and of course, Ronald Reagan at the White House. Weapons dealing, pedophilia, and other things arriving at the White House, guys, is no novelty. The Washington Times talks about it in an article in June 1989. Let me show you here. Watch this article. Homosexual prostitution inquiry ensnares VIPs with Reagan Bush. Call boys took midnight tour of White House. Now, this is also a product of what Roy Cohn was doing back in the days, but at this point he was already dead. So somebody else was continuing for him. Call boys took midnight tour of the White House. I mean, it's scandalous to say the least. A homosexual prostitution ring is under investigation by federal and district authorities and includes among its clients key officials of the Reagan and Bush administration, military officers, congressional aides, and U.S. and foreign businessmen with close ties to Washington political elite. Documents obtained by the Washington Times reveal. Okay. So you see, nothing has really changed. There has always been a lot of corruption and in all this. And to tell you the truth, guys, people say, but the B'nai Brit, they are such good people. They did a lot for, for the poor here, or for this, for the Jewish community, for this and that. I show you something here. This is a diploma given to a guy called John Farset. Now, those who have read volume 1 of my confessions have definitely, they know who I'm talking about, because this guy is considered one of the leaders of the Ordo Templi Orientis of Aleister Crowley in Norway. And he was awarded here a diploma, a recognition by the B'nai Brit, because John Farset goes around saying that he is debunking conspiracy theorists. Imagine this, a guy who is responsible for the OTO in the city of Oslo in Norway ends up receiving a recognition for his work against conspiracy theorists by the B'nai Brit. This is absolutely insane. In fact, I had published an article many years ago in 2017. Check this article out. OTO scumbag. John Farset gets what he deserves. This was when John Farset was attacked by I don't know, it says here, last Friday, as reported by one of Norway's leading newspapers, Dagbladet, journalist and writer John Farset, a prominent member of the Norwegian Ordo Templi Orientis, as well as the other occult orders, was attacked and injured in Oslo by a supposed conspiracy theorist. And this guy, Farset, who threatened my life back in 2003, because he threatened my life, this scumbag. We're talking about Illuminati confession, 30 years of Illuminati confessions. Well, before I even started my confessions, this guy was one of the reasons why I started, because, so Here, you see the official recognition given by the B'nai Brit. So how does the B'nai Brit justify itself in giving such a recognition to a Satanist? How? There is nothing to debunk here. There is only evidence. I mean, when I bring you the evidence about Trump, when I give you the evidence about these people, I'm bringing you the documents, the receipts. So there is very little that one can say. I'm very glad that we have a politician like Nancy Mace, who has finally broke ranks from the rest of the Republicans who seem to be ignoring the gravity of this whole Epstein affair. It's really incredible. How is it possible? But fortunately, we have at least people like her. Marjorie Taylor Greene, unfortunately, has left the Congress. And of course, Massey.
Famous people, rich people, people in power, prime ministers, former presidents, etc., media personalities that are named in these files. And that's why I say this is going to go down as the greatest cover-up, one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. And I don't believe the girls are actually going to see justice, which is why it's going to be incumbent upon people like Democrat Ro Khanna, Republican Thomas Massey. I'm a Republican myself who's willing to name some of those names in our committee work, on the floor of the House, whatever it takes, because this kind of thing cannot continue to go on. I want to give the next girl hope that when she comes forward, she won't be shamed. Her life won't be smeared in the Daily Mail or whatever the next press, is going to do. What they do to female victims and to children is disgusting, because they're protecting their rich and powerful friends. But you'd be surprised, shocked even at some of the names in the file.
You will be shocked about the names, the unredacted, of course, names, because then we have the redacted ones that have never been shown, But the moment they were shown, apparently Pam Bondi was taking notes on who was, because you have only 4 computers, imagine, for all the Congress members to access the unredacted versions. And then you have Pam Bondi, of course, who was tracing secretly with the DOJ every single politician, something which I find completely outrageous. It's beyond, there is things that I simply think are way too much here. How can you tolerate something like that? The fact that a congressperson who is entrusted, with all the relevance they have through the votes of the people who voted them, and goes there in a reserved capacity, in a private way, so they don't get monitored, with these 4 computers, and then instead they are traced, and Pam Bondi is actually taking notes, and that is insane, guys. Think about it. It's completely insane, the fact that they are tracing every single information, redacted information from the files. When I saw Pam Bondi being caught with their hands in the cookie jar, basically, I was like pretty shocked. I want to thank Helen Sucatre, Margot Rosada Minta, Daniel Estes, amongst the sponsors of today, the people who, of course, are encouraging me also by purchasing this great book, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, which is exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world. The Republican Party will change, I'm sure, after the midterm elections. That's for sure. Another important information that came out in the last few days was the video of Epstein's butler, who was trying to sell the black book, which, by the way, I have used for a lot of the information on Jeffrey Epstein, because the black book, the unredacted version that was initially circulating, it's very important, because the names on it can direct you in studying and then understanding all these people. We have also discussed today how the B'nai Brit came to become one of the most important, actually the most important Jewish fraternity in the world. They were founded here in America, but then, of course, they started to expand in Germany, in other places around the world. And nowadays, they have thousands, even millions, I don't know. I mean, they have a bunch of members all over the place, and it's a very influential organization. This is also regarding Roy Cohn. There was actually an article from 1978 that explains once more who this guy really was. Roy Cohn at 51 enjoys prosperity and controversy. Imagine that. And it says here, Roy Cohn turned 51 yesterday. The enfant terrible of the McCarthy era is very much the center of controversy, as he has always been. So the guy was very much, the man who helped polarize the country's view on communism 25 years ago, because he was McCarthy's lawyer. So he definitely was always a very important figure. But what people don't know is that behind the scenes, he was also involved in very dubious activities, corruption, blackmailing operations that preceded Jeffrey Epstein with the same kind of modality. It's important, guys, that we expose all this and more. Check this out.
As the media and members of Congress were sifting through the latest Jeffrey Epstein files released by the Department of Justice, one topic continued to elude them, and that would be Epstein's by now well-established ties to Israeli and U.S. intelligence. So our Capitol Hill correspondent, Julian Andreoni, put the question directly to members of Congress to force them to finally at least have to answer the question. Here's what they told him.
I'm not following that.
You're not following the Jeffrey Epstein thing at all?
It's only superficial. I mean...
Here, let me come around to the other side of you.
It is tawdry, but, like, that's just not where my head... In fact, I deliberately try not to read it because...
Really?
I got so many things... You know, right now we're trying to... We got so many important things we're having to do.
It's not important? I mean, it could be a national security threat.
It is
But it's not important for these people because they're covering up.
important, but it is nothing over which I have control. I really don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know, but obviously this now circulation information that this is more tied to maybe international maligned interest is something we should figure out.
I have any idea about that. I
We have
think
some
it's important. I think it's, and I haven't seen all the reporting, but I do think it is important that the documents released and giving the committees and others appropriate time to go through them to see what has happened, what's going on.
Well, let's put it this way. Our investigation is continuing. We've got a lot to do. I think there are particularly Wall Street bank issues, where those banks just look the other way, constantly. And let's put it this way, we're not going to leave those issues off the table.
I haven't read any of that stuff. I apologize. I'm too busy trying to figure out our issues right here.
Okay.
Ask another member on intelligence.
There's a number of different reports here. There was an Israeli spy who stayed in his apartment in New York City for several weeks on end. I mean, this is somebody who has spent a bunch of time with the most powerful political and...
So you see here, they simply, there's nothing to see here. Let's move on. And most people are focused, of course, on the connections with the intelligence agencies, with Mossad. Now, how is it possible that when we talk about the CIA, you know very well that the CIA, the NSA, of other organizations are subject to the power of the Illuminati, and organizations like the B'nai Brit are the Illuminati of the Jewish world, and they are the ones controlling the intelligence agencies, not the other way around. So groups like the Mega Group, for example, which was also like the inner circle of the B'nai Brit, the finance, the lodge which Roy Cohn also was part of. These are, of course, the Illuminati, and Epstein was definitely somebody who represented the Sabbatean Frankist influence in the modern circles of finance, of power, of intelligence. So there is too much superficiality, let's say, and there is also too many of these politicians who simply don't want to answer the question.
Beliefs in our country. Jeffrey Epstein, that is.
I'm not debating that. What I'm saying is that that's totally dependent on who was actually there when this alleged agent was there.
Right. So if he was just staying there alone.
If the agent was just there with Epstein, and Epstein doesn't have confidential classified information, then what are we talking about?
No, of course, that all should be looked into. But I just don't go off of, Reddit posts. I want to see actual evidence of it.
Well, we've gone through the emails. I mean, I can send you a link to our reporting. This is not Reddit posts.
No, I understand, but there's a lot of emails. They don't necessarily mean that it's fact, right?
Right.
So, but there's obviously...
But if you have the former Prime Minister of Israel and then Jeffrey Epstein himself coordinating together to...
Okay, so let's go back to that pivotal moment, that 1983 dinner specifically sought to honor Roy Cohn for his pro-Israel advocacy and its effort to fortify Israel's economy, because it was at that event that we find Rupert Murdoch, Donald Trump, and the head of Bear Stearns, Alan Greenberg, all of whom will be connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Remember, the moment in which Roy Cohn dies of AIDS, because he dies of AIDS, he was always at the Studio 54. He was an homosexual, but he was very promiscuous. He was always at the Studio 54, and he was always partying. And in 1986, like many people of that time, he ends up dying of AIDS. The system needs somebody like him, needs somebody who can be unscrupulous as him, somebody who can be just as deceptive and criminal as him. That's the moment in which Jeffrey Epstein gets recruited even further into the operation by Les Wexner, gets given a whole building in New York. That's the moment in which, of course, we see Jeffrey Epstein going to the next level. So I repeat, based on available information, there is no definitive public knowledge that Roy Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein ever met or were acquaintances. But remember that Roy Cohn was a close member to Donald Trump from the early 70s until Cohn's death, and Epstein immediately after becomes associated with Donald J. Trump. So we have here, of course, cases of corruption that involved Roy Cohn that still, till the day he died, was never touched by anything. He was going in and out of the White House, being a very influential figure. Roy Cohn was indicted yesterday on charges of bribery. This was back. Imagine this article is from 1969. Did something happen to him? No, absolutely nothing. He was always a very influential individual, and the same for Jeffrey Epstein. That's why the power in Washington, the swamp, is acting this way.
One of his top aides and spies to stay in the apartment. That is more than a Reddit post, no?
No, yeah, and that should be looked into.
Okay.
Just like all the Trump stuff is being looked into, just like the stuff with the royal family in England's being looked into, so like all of that should be looked into. Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I don't know anything about that, so, the DOJ should just disclose all of the documents that they have as required by law.
I wouldn't be surprised.
You wouldn't be surprised? Why is that?
Well, you got to ask yourself, how was he allowed to get away with what he was getting away with for so long? using sexual exploitation like that is been a tactic used by many intelligence agencies.
I mean, the more I learn about what's in these files, the more I learn about Epstein's ties. Nothing would surprise me.
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. I have no idea. Not something that I have any information about.
Do you think, based on any of the public reporting, he had any ties to intelligence agencies?
I have no idea.
I have no idea. I'm still just a freshman up here, so I'm still trying to learn the ropes, but I have no idea what ties he had to anybody.
Boy, I don't know the answer to that. But this is another reason why full transparency is absolutely necessary.
We need to have a full release of these Epstein papers, of these files.
Yeah, where there's a lot of smoke, there's fire. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Okay.
I've read a lot of those emails. So.
I mean, I'm concerned with the implications to so many people in power and people currently in this administration.
First I've heard about it. We're working appropriation bills today, and that's where my focus is today.
I do not know the answer to that. I know there's a lot of speculation and a lot of reporting about it, but I've not been able to systematically study.
Have you seen any of the reporting that's public or
I've
the
seen the
emails?
reporting, yes.
Do you think he had any ties to intelligence agencies?
I have no idea.
Yes, they have no idea. Because, of course, he had ties with intelligence agency. The whole thing was an operation run for the intelligence agencies, but also by the Sabbatean Frankists to control, still to this day, the intelligence agencies, just like the Jesuits do. If you want to know more about all these unsettling truths about Epstein and the New World Order, please check out leozagami.com, check out my books, the 12 volumes of my confessions. Today we have, of course, connected a few dots. Then the Nightbreed created lodges to control Hollywood. If you want to know more about Hollywood, you can go and check out volume 8 of my confessions. This whole system is simply hidden in plain sight. I mean, we have discussed today the shocking origins of all this. But remember, in regards to also this whole palavas, the English will say, we can never, of course, then not point out also on the connection with Robert Maxwell, who apparently introduced Ghislaine to her daughter Ghislaine to Jeffrey Epstein, because at the end of the 80s, he wanted Ghislaine to find a husband. And of course, Donald J. Trump was always very close to Robert Maxwell, who also died in very mysterious circumstances. And by the way, like I explained in this book, Robert Maxwell claimed to be the reincarnation of Jacob Frank. This is a very important thing. And at the same time, his surname was Hawk. He was a Sabbatean Frankist from Eastern Europe. So don't miss next week's episode. Keep on supporting the show. Thanks to Ellen Sucate, Margot Minta, Daniel Estes. If you want to become, of course, sponsors of a show, you can do it anonymously or publicly. Let us know with a note when you send the donation. And I see you next week.
Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body. Secret society, I'm trying to keep it on.